fair to say I've got a poetical bone in my body. And if you ever saw any of the things I've tried to draw and picture, frankly, it's alarming. If not downright scary. At least that's what my wife says. And she's a painter. And I always admire people who can bring creativity to sometimes quite challenging situations, who can take a notion or a concept and express it in ways that others can understand. My background, in contrast to Angus's, is very much a creature of the Scottish educational system of many years ago, in fact more years ago than I care to remember, and certainly share with you this afternoon. But suffice to say, it was based upon the 3 R's. It was based upon sit up, shut up and learn. And if you can't do that, we have a product that we buy from Lochgelly, and that will bring you into line. So that was not entirely conducive to easy learning, but it did manage to impart some basic concepts. And one of those concepts was education, by and large, is the key to everyone's development. Without it, pretty much nothing can happen. And also, those who are deprived of it are made victims. However well society is conceived and constructed, those who have a better education than others tend to get a leg up. And in some areas that's regarded as being appropriate and fitting. Others would argue that it's unfair and needs to be challenged. So that's a bit of my background. That took me into university, where it never occurred to me to do anything else but take a degree in engineering. Later I discovered that that wasn't really what I wanted to do, so therefore I moved to companies who would give me an opportunity to do something different, but still to apply and employ engineering skills. And IBM came along and said, why don't you spend some time looking at communications inside large corporations? Because believe me, they are befuddled and they don't work, and it costs us a fortune, and we lose all our good people, and we find it difficult to hire people to replace them, and we need the best folks around, otherwise we can't survive and prosper. And that took me into looking at the way organisations function. And I'm getting to the point here when we talk about areas like constitutions, because I believe that there are similarities between the way large corporations operate and the way large groups of nations cooperate. So after a while, people came along and said, we would like to use these skills that you've developed with a large range of corporations, multinational corporations. Would you like to be a consultant? And I said, I'm not sure, what does a consultant do? And they said, well, they hire themselves out so that organisations across the world can make use of that expertise. And I said, well, I don't have any expertise. And they said, well, actually, we've looked at what you've done elsewhere, and we beg to differ. And we're willing to give you X amount of money per day to share with us. And I thought, gracious, what a break. Sharing what? I know not. So anyway, it steamrolled from there, because we started to do work in internal communications in large corporations. And then it became clear to us that despite what the people in charge thought, communication wasn't the problem. It just wasn't the problem. They thought it was the problem. They were convinced it was the problem. They were so convinced they wanted to give me enormous amounts of money to fix the problem. When we looked at it in detail, the problem wasn't communication. It never is. The problem was values. Let me give you an example, as close as I can conceive of how to represent the difference between communication and values, but the connection. It's a bit like in large corporations, hiring people like me to look at communications is akin to hiring a very expensive interior decorator and saying, look, we've used interior decorators before, we've paid them a huge amount of money, communications are no better than they were before we hired them. So, 2 questions. Did we hire the wrong person? Or perhaps we hired the wrong person, or we didn't give enough money, or perhaps it was a bit of both, but who knows? You go off and find out what the problem was. When we looked at it more closely, the problem was that they were hiring very expensive people and giving them lots of money to effectively put up wallpaper or wall coverings on a surface that had not been treated. The inevitable result was the whole shooting match came off after a short period of time, and it had to be redone. So we said, you need to look at the surface, you need to look at the basics here, and then you can start to move forward. What are the basics? The basics of the values, the basics of the ethics, the morality, the norms, the philosophy behind what you're trying to do. Do people share it? Have you ever worried about that? Did it ever concern you that the folks in your organisation didn't know what they were trying to do right from the get-go? Or they questioned the morality of what you were doing? So I wrote a couple of books on business ethics, and pretty much everyone said to me, you know, business ethics is an oxymoron. It's an oxymoron like military intelligence or airline food. They just go together. I mean, you just can't sell business ethics to anyone. So we wrote the books, and the FT were kind enough to cover the books in some detail. And out of the blue, we had a call from Shell, who said, boy, are we in a mess. We have all sorts of issues here. We thought they were communications, we read your book, and now we think we understand. It's not communications, it's us. It's the way we think about ourselves. It's the way we are. It's what is deep inside us, and we haven't a clue how to deal with that, even to express it. But it seems to us it's got something to do with ethics and morals and values. And I said, well, why me? And he said, because you appear to be bringing engineering discipline to an amorphous subject or topic. And we are all engineers. So while we like talking to philosophers and academics, what we really want is someone who can explain this in language using a lexicon that we can understand. Because it makes us too uncomfortable, frankly. And we can't get our arms around ourselves. So we made a lot of money and wrote several books, additional books on business ethics. Because everyone and his brother wanted to hire us. Because all of a sudden ethics was sexy. Everyone and his brother and sister wanted to talk about ethics, not just in businesses but elsewhere. And there is no mechanism inside a large organisation for talking about its values, pretty much. Back then there certainly wasn't. Where do you go? You go to HR, human resources. You go to the company secretary. You go to your boss. What's your boss going to say? You want to talk about ethics. Isn't that a conversation you should have had when you're being recruited? It's a bit late now, isn't it? Besides, I thought you believed in what we were trying to do here. Are you trying to tell me you don't believe? Maybe we should find something else. It's an embarrassing conversation. So, we started to look at ways that companies could be more open and work through some of these issues. And we determined in the end it was about two things, really. One is commitment. In other words, these are our values. There you are, we've written them down. We've shared them in draft form with our people, and by and large, they accept them. That's no different to PR. That's got nothing to do with ethics as such. And the other part, which is the important part, is about commitment. In other words, how do you, in fact, implement those nice values that you spent so long and you paid me an enormous amount of money to help develop for you? How do you implement all this stuff? And that's the hard part. Because then you have to have a conversation about money. And that's where life gets really interesting. Because how do you decide? Say, for example, you've got someone here like Angus. Angus is the pillar of rectitude. After all, he's a poet, for crying out loud. He's not interested in profits as such, are you?
I'm very interested in money.
In money, okay.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, I'm the pillar of rectitude. Right? He's interested in money. We have a choice to make. We can cheat the public, cheat a customer, or we can cheat the supplier. So we've got our code of ethics here, and it says, never cheat customers, suppliers, other employees, etc., etc. But I'm Angus's boss, and I say to Angus, you know something, Angus, have you read this? And he said, yes. I said, do you know what you're required to do here? Yes. Do you have any difficulty doing what you're required to do here? He says, well, I'm not sure if it meets the code of ethics. Is that going to be a problem for you, Angus? Angus, no, not really. So I set his ethics, not the company, not this piece of paper, etc. Why is that important? Because there are connections between states and the way companies operate. Because at the end of the day, states are just big organisations like big corporations. Many big corporations are worth much more than states, or nations, or countries, however you want to define the term. So, what about the way a state organised itself? Angus has said to us earlier that what he would like to see is the Scottish Parliament working more effectively. If it doesn't work effectively, there's probably a good reason for that. And it may be akin to the reason why big corporations don't work effectively, why they overlook things, why they say, I want to further your interests but not hers. How do they choose? And the answer is, right, at the end of the day, there has to be structure and commitment. These are two things. And that's what this book is an attempt to do. It's a model constitution. It's a code of ethics for a state. It says, this is what we stand for, and this is what we will not stand for. So if you do any of the things that we don't stand for, then I'm afraid the state will need to take action. If you represent the things that we do stand for, then we will applaud that. So there are clear distinctions between that which is acceptable and that which is unacceptable. But who determines what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? Who writes the Constitution? Does Angus do it? Do I do it? I'm very good at this sort of thing. Does Elliot Bulmer do it? And how do we know when we've got it right? How do we change it if we haven't got it right? What do other people do? What do the Slovenes do? What do the Slovaks do? What do the Bulgarians do? What do the Tunisians do? Etc., etc. And that takes us directly to the issue here and now. We live in an archipelago where we have almost no background and understanding of constitutions. I could show you a book produced in the United States for 7-year-olds. It's roughly about that size. There isn't a single kid in the United States, almost, who doesn't understand the constitutional concepts in that book about the US Constitution. I could go to any grown-up, almost, in the UK and say, describe the UK Constitution for me. And we start off with, well, what do you mean by constitution? Does it have to be written down? Because I rather prefer the idea of making it up as we go along. Because that's really helpful for me as a politician. To make no commitments about values or principles that I cannot change tomorrow morning. Because Parliament is sovereign. And you see where this is going now. We have to be a little bit careful about saying, hey, let's transfer sovereignty from a building in Westminster to a building in Edinburgh. That won't work. That will not work. We have to be very careful about a constitution for the common good. Because if we're not, we'll end up with a constitution which reflects some of the worst aspects of the constitution and state making. But I would suggest to you those of you who are wearing yes badges in particular, that this is a wonderful opportunity. Heaven sent, not just once in a lifetime, but well beyond that, to say, I am going to get involved in developing, because I have as much right and as much experience as anyone else here, because you live in this archipelago where no one has any experience of constitutions. Our Prime Minister, bless his cotton socks, has no idea of the difference between a state, a country, and a nation, because he uses the words interchangeably. Why should that be a surprise? Is there anything in the education system that helped him to deal with that? I suspect there is. He was told, you don't need these things. And besides, even if you did have them, they would constrain you. They would stop you from doing the things you need to do. You would, for example, find yourself going back to the people to ask for their permission to go to war. What a bummer! What a bummer! Heavens! Who would want that constraint? And that's why we have to be careful about transferring sovereignty from a building to another building. Because there will be a lot of people in this room who might be thinking, you know something, I want to be consulted before we go to war. Before our boys go into a position where they're in jeopardy, I want to be consulted. You could write that into a constitution. You could write security for the National Health Service into a constitution. You could do lots of things in a constitution. And the politicians would be bound by that, because it would not be within their power to change it without coming back and saying, do you mind? And then you might mind. And therefore they can't make the change. So it is important. Are constitutions a panacea? Of course not. Heavens, we've only got to look around and we'll see all sorts of states doing all sorts of naughty things, and they all have written constitutions, most of them. But is it a fundamental first step in forming a decent state? I would argue yes. And I would argue yes.
So what are your politics?
My politics, I think, would probably describe as fairly liberal.
Liberal?
Yeah, but I do not, in any way or shape or form.
You're a liberal corporate insider.
Yes, that's right.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Have you met anyone like me before? Perhaps not.